Introduce you to two men now who are both lecturers in UCD, and they have come to a conviction and a belief in Garabandal and the whole story around Garabandal comparatively late in life. I don't mean that they are either of them old men, but I mean comparatively recently. They have been staunch Catholics all their lives, but they've come to appreciate Garabandal, and they are talking to us about it. Dr. David Doyle is a lecturer in modern history in UCD, MA, PhD, married, 3 children, 37 years of age. Dr. Jim Thompson is a lecturer in chemistry in UCD, PhD, married, 4 children, and he's 49 years of age. Now, just to start, as it were, at the end, David, can I ask you pithily to remind us of the message and the warning of Garabandal, first of all?
There were 2 messages. The first message was given publicly on October the 18th, 1961. The second message on the 18th of June, 1965. The first message was roughly as follows. I won't remember exactly.
No, not precisely.
We must do much penance. We must make many sacrifices. We must visit the Blessed Sacrament frequently. But first, we must lead virtuous lives. If we do not, a great chastisement will befall us. The cup is filling up, and if we do not change, a very great chastisement will occur to us. The second message was 4 years later. The first message was given to the 4 visionaries. The second message just to one of them, Conchita Gonzalez. This was as follows, roughly. It's somewhat longer, and I mightn't get it exactly correct. As my message of the 18th of October has not been complied with, I am now giving you another one, and it will be the last. The cup was filling up. It is now flowing over. Many cardinals, many bishops, many priests are on the road to perdition and are taking many souls with them. Less and less attention is being paid to the Blessed Eucharist. You can turn the wrath of God from yourselves by your efforts. If you ask for his forgiveness with sincere hearts, he will pardon you. I, your Holy Mother, through the intercession of the Archangel Michael, am asking you to amend your lives. This is the last warning. I love you very much, and I do not want your condemnation. If you pray to us sincerely, we will answer your requests. Think about the passion of Jesus. Make many sacrifices. They were the messages.
Now, Conchita particularly, have you actually met Conchita, David?
Yes, I didn't know a thing about Garabandal until December 1980, when BBC Everyman film was first shown. I was very struck by it. It fit in with work I'd been doing in the state of the church. And being a historian, I then got all the documentation I could, and it fit together. It seemed naturally inexplicable, which is the first test of what's truly miraculous, according to the criteria established by the church. Secondly, it seemed totally compatible with orthodoxy, and indeed with a very unusual level of collective holiness in the village. But yet I wanted more, and so I was giving academic papers in America, and I went and saw her. I rang her up and I said, I gave her my reasons why I thought what she had testified was true, and asked her could I see her. So I went to see her, and we talked. Not about the events, because they have been remarkably scrutinized. There are about 2 books on them. There's commissioned documentation of unbelievable amplitude. I wanted to get a sense of her as a modern New Yorker. My feeling was, if something happened to a villager in the mountains of Spain, which was inauthentic, a sensible, modernized New York woman would be the first really either to confess it or to show some great disparity or discontinuity in her personality. And there was none, and she's as convinced now as she was then. Indeed, the more she sees of the wider world, the more convinced she is, and indeed the more frightened she is, to the extent that she does say quite openly that she wishes her children hadn't been born, because she's so certain that the events will now come to pass. Our Lady did not say the chastisement would occur. She said it was conditional. But Conchita now feels that mankind is so sinful and so irremediably so that without a truly great miracle, that these things will come to pass.
And it will be some worldwide retribution, what, the destruction of the world, or does she give any hints?
Various ones of the girls, they were given a preview, and various of them have given different pieces of information at different times to inquirers. We do know that when they saw the preview of it, they were terrified, they screamed. They shouted out, rather let children die than that they would go through this. Oh, may everyone have a chance to go to confession before this. They talk in terms of great heat, of people falling down, dying of thirst, and of overwhelming heat and throwing themselves into water, but all the water is turned to steam. But they say that such will be the nature of the chastisement, that the human threshold of pain will clearly rise, that people will go through levels of suffering which are so unimaginable that in normal circumstances people would die from them, but this will not happen until the chastisement is completed,
yes.
and then who knows?
Yes,
They're not
and
quite
presumably
specific.
this is within the next, say, 20 years, David, if we're talking about Conchita's children, well, perhaps the next 30, 40 years.
That's right. Initially, as reports came out from Spain in the 60s, long before I heard of them, and if I'd heard of them then, I wouldn't have paid it any attention whatsoever. People tended to jump the gun, even Desmond Rush and the Irish Independent, talk as though it were just a year or two away. But the girls have said specifically that Our Lady told them, when they said they were terrified for their children, and at that point they didn't even know if they were going to have children, she said, don't worry, your children will all be grown up. In fact, they have also been told that their children will apostatize, which fits the pattern of what's going on today, and that their husbands will no longer believe them, and their husbands believe them now. So obviously it's not something that's going to be immediate. On the other hand, they say that John Paul II is the last pope, so it's not going to be that far away either, if events transpire as they have prophesied.
Yeah. Jim, can I ask you, in what circumstances did you come to this conviction about Garabandal and your interest in it?
With the intention of showing that it was false. I set out to demonstrate that it was false, that I could show scientifically that these supernatural events were explicable, and that the theology, the spirituality of it, wasn't all it was made out to be, because there have been a large number of claims for some very odd events recently. This was a book my daughter brought home, and I wanted to read it first to make sure that she was kept in the straight and narrow, as it were. And very much to my surprise, I couldn't fault it. So I sought the advice of other people who had examined this. What's most striking about it is the number of, well, academics in general, scientists in particular, who have been involved in this. The girls, for example, have been examined most unusually actually during the apparitions. They were actually physically tested, medically tested during the apparitions.
Whilst they were in ecstasy?
That's correct, yes. And there's no doubt at all about the alleged supernatural events. They occurred, the ones that were visible, the excessive weight, for example, and indeed on one occasion, to successive people, excessive weight and lack of weight.
What do you mean
Two fully grown men were unable to lift one of these 12-year-old children.
Yes, I see.
The attempt was made initially because they were kneeling on very sharp stones and with the idea of moving them to a more comfortable position. And the person who tried to lift them was unable to do so. A second adult tried to help and couldn't lift. On one occasion, 3 men were unable to lift. And yet, a Spanish medical man at that stage, who was a believer, but doubtful, he says that he said a little prayer to Our Lady. He said, give me a sign. And with the intention of demonstrating to himself that they really were very heavy, he caught hold of one of the girls and lifted her with 2 fingers, literally. So she was extremely light to him and extremely heavy to other people. And this is one of these, I suppose you might call them in a way the theatricalities of the situation, to catch people's attention.
Yes, can I just interrupt you there to say that we did hope to bring you a little piece of that Everyman film, which happens to be on tape as far as we're concerned, which shows you Conchita, because I know a lot of Irish people have never actually seen Conchita. Unfortunately, we can't, because we're involved in an industrial dispute in that section of the building tonight, so unless there's another miracle or something, we won't be able to have that particular button pressed. But I do have a piece of film that we showed you before, last time we talked about this, which is one of the original, as it were, home movies which was made. You can roll it there, Colette, please, which is, we'll bring to mind, is not very good quality now, not very good quality, of the girls during one of the apparitions.
Here are some amateur motion pictures of an ecstasy that took place about 1½ months after the apparitions began. On this day, only 2 of the girls were involved. We see Mary Lowley on the left and Jacinta on the right. Incidentally, the woman standing directly behind the girls is Mary Lowley's mother. If we could read lips in Spanish, I'm sure we would find that they are either speaking casually with our Blessed Mother, or they are saying prayers. By these examples, the Blessed Virgin teaches us the need for private prayer. In these next scenes, I call your attention to their synchronized movements. The Blessed Virgin was teaching these children to make the sign of the cross with reverence. And we see them repeating it over and over again. This coordination was maintained by the children for long periods of time. Often their facial expressions were synchronized. The girls' faces would change from big smiles to serious expressions, and then back to smiles again, all simultaneously and in such a way that it would have been impossible for them to plan it in advance. In these scenes, their expressions are serious, and they never glance at the photographer or anyone else. They always keep their eyes positioned upward.
Now, I told you the quality was not very good. Incidentally, we'll take calls at 696666 if you want to get involved in this, or if anybody in the audience wants to ask some questions which you've always wondered about. Was there any moment, David and Jim, was there any specific moment or influence or person which made you make the decision which you've made about Garabandal? Is there any specific point that you can look back on and say, that was the...
Not for me, I don't think so. It was a slow process.
Slow process. You did?
Well, except that there's an instinctive feeling at some stage. You feel it fits with your previous experience. But I was still looking for an explanation for the supernatural events. I still am.
Yes. David, you?
No, about 2 years before, I had made a critical study of Knock, not believing it, and I reached the conclusion that either a whole village is telling lies or it isn't, and I accepted it. But I wasn't particularly close to Our Lady in my prayer life. Shortly before Garabandal, something personal and private happened to make me so, and when I saw the film, something again, instinctive, intuitive, and completely responsive, said, yes, she's telling the truth.
What about the villagers themselves in Garabandal? Is there any acrimony amongst them or dispute amongst them about it?
There are 300 villagers. Only 7 of them now say that the events did not occur, which is unbelievable unanimity. When you consider that when the events occurred, the village was really out of the 20th century. It was completely remote, no electricity, no roads. Within a short period after the apparitions, they were bombarded with all the pseudo-modern explanations. For the first time, they heard of things like collective hallucination, autosuggestion, mental disturbance. And at the same time, the bishops at the time were opposed to the apparitions, were refusing the sacraments to the girls unless they retracted, so that a small number of people changed their minds, despite all that they'd seen over a period of 4 years. What's remarkable is that about 290 people didn't change their minds, and when the bishops asked them to sign documents denying the events, they, as the mothers, said to the girls, listen, if you can throw a rapture for us now, we'll sign those documents, which is a very common sense, down-to-earth view. And that is the position of the villagers to this day.
Yes, I saw that Everyman film of which you speak, and part of which we hope to show. And Conchita seems to be a remarkably level-headed, ordinary, sensible, straightforward person. I don't know what you have a right to expect a person like that to be, but she seemed absolutely normal, and she didn't seem to me to be spinning. I mean, it's a hell of a yarn to spin for so long, so consistently, if it is a thing. Now, what would it take to make you both not believe anymore? What would shake your faith in it?
Do you want to go first? We've talked
We're
about
so
this.
deeply into this, you know, it's very difficult to know. I suppose since we accept the infallibility of the Pope, if the Pope made a dogmatic statement to that effect, which is very unlikely to do in any case, I don't know, explanation for the various supernatural events. There are so many of them, though, it's very difficult to see how, and they're so different, it's very difficult to see how this could occur. But I'd
Well-
certainly want to start beginning to find explanations. There are so many predictions that have been made. Really, if any one of these fails...
Likewise. The miracle which is promised, just remind us again about the miracle which is promised.
We don't know the nature of the miracle. It will be seen at Garabandal.
It will be seen by the
will see it
Pope
no matter
wherever
where
he is, yes.
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 As a result of this, Russia will be converted. All those present will be converted. The
Yeah.
doubters will be converted.
Mhm.
And that, there will be a supernatural sign left there permanently at the pines, a group of 9 pines. And that's about all we know about the miracle itself.
Would there be anything, David, that would shake your conviction?
Yes, I think if any of the predictions are falsified, I would immediately say there's a mistake somewhere. On the other hand, all the predictions to date are occurring. If anyone in 1961 or even 65 said we would have a time when priests would no longer believe the Blessed Sacrament is truly God, they would have been certified. But I've spoken to priests like that in North America. If anyone said in 1961, 1965, there'd be mass confusion in the church, great disobedience to the church, and mass apostasy from the church, I wouldn't have believed it. But in 1965, Belgium, northern Italy, northern Spain, western France, Quebec were all practicing. Now the only place where an aggregate population is practicing Catholicism is Ireland and perhaps Lithuania, not even Poland. This is so unbelievable that the prophecies which have already been fulfilled are sufficient to keep my faith very strong. It would take something quite remarkable now to reverse it. But it ought to be said that it has also been predicted that some decisive event will happen before the warning, before the miracle, before the chastisement, which will cause most of humanity to lose faith in it. Jim and I find this difficult to imagine, but presumably that too...
Some decisive event
Some decisive event will happen to deprive even the spouses of the girls of belief in it, and perhaps even the girls themselves.
Of belief in Garabandal.
Of belief in Garabandal. Now, this happened once before. Our Lady predicted that there would be doubt amongst them. The girls were overheard at the time those films were taken, saying, how can you say there will come a time when we will deny you, when we see you now? But it happened in 63. There was confusion amongst them again in late 66, when they were put under such pressure by psychologists and by the bishop. So that there's no question that if things unroll as they've been unrolling, there'll come a time when they'll deny that too. And then, oddly enough, when they've denied before, they've denied seeing Our Lady, but they've never denied the miracle. Presumably they'll deny everything except Conchita will still announce the miracle,
Yes,
which is then to restore her belief in it.
And she is to announce the miracle sometime before it happens.
That's right.
A specific time before it
8
happens?
days before.
8 days before it happens. And then after the miracle happens, then what?
Before the miracle, there'll have been a warning in
Yes,
which
we have
people
a
will have
warning
seen their
which-
sins,
yeah, preparatory for it.
in which all machinery throughout the world will stop. Planes will stop in the sky, and people will have a frightening insight into the state of their souls. Then, within a year, it could be within days, it could be 11 months, the miracle will take place at Garabandal. This, Our Lady has told them, is to reassure people that reform is possible. Then there'll be another delay in which people hopefully will completely renovate their lives, in which whole nations will return to God. And then if that doesn't happen, there'll be this chastisement.
Are you frightened by all of this, both of you?
I find it very hopeful, actually. I mean, the chastisement is obviously very terrifying, but then it's conditional. It's sort of like the situation, if you have a lot of children playing out in a road, say, in a village, and you hear the rumbling in the distance, like the situation the world is today. I mean, you have to be blind to think that there's nothing going wrong in the world today. And someone says, look, there's a runaway lorry coming down the road, get the children off the road. How many people would say, God, that's too frightening, I won't bother about that. You'd go out and do it, it's common sense. We have the ability, in the sense that if we reform, there will be no chastisement.
Okay, can I take a couple of calls? What line are we on? Line 1. Let's try line 1 then and see who's there who might have a query about this. Hello, line 1.
Hello?
Yes.
I want to object as a taxpayer to these two gentlemen. I don't mind them giving their private, peculiar views privately, but as employees of UCD or lecturers, actually, I want to object as a taxpayer, right?
Why?
Because I think they're talking a load of superstitious rubbish. They're supposed to be academics, and in this sense, they're ridiculing everything academic. They're talking about speculation and, in my opinion, superstition. Right?
Yes.
Secondly, I think as a believer in a future United Ireland, and I mean 200 years away, because of what the prophets have done, I think they are helping to put a nail in that coffin. And thirdly, I'd like to ask the gentleman who talks about the prophecy of the conversion of Russia, is there any prophecy about the conversion of America? Right? That's all, Gay.
Right, thank you. Thank
Right.
you. Goodbye. Don't see what taxpayer has to do with it, actually, but however... Yes, David, sorry.
Well, that argument is the argument that fundamental truth about the nature of God, about the ultimate nature of reality, cannot be studied critically and academically. That in itself is a form of prejudice. I'd say that 3/4 of the faculty at UCD are believers. A number of them teach in areas where belief is crucial, in philosophy, in ethics, in political science. So far, the state hasn't prohibited us. Our right to continue teaching within a framework of truth in which subordinate truths accept that there is a higher truth has never been denied by the state. I have a hunch that it's going to be denied in many countries, but not Ireland. Yet it might be if our friend and his friends take control of teachers' unions.
Conversion of Russia and not the conversion of America. What's he talking about there?
I must admit that makes me uncomfortable. America is badly in need of a form of conversion. There are two forms of atheism. There's the atheism that denies God, and there's the atheism that's rapidly developing in America that puts prostitutes, politicians, and priests all on the same scenario and says they all mean the same thing. This, to me, is even more dangerous, and I've seen it develop in America.
Yeah, and what answer would you make to the gentleman who phoned?
Well, to that, on Russia itself, we can simply report what Our Lady has said. Perhaps Russia is fortunate. Perhaps Russia will be converted. God knows what's going to happen to America.
Gosh, that's yes, nobody in the audience wants it. Line 2 I'm going to, Peter. Yes, line 2.
Hello.
Yes.
I just want to say that I have no doubt that these girls had a paranormal experience, but can we be sure it came from God? It conflicts with many of us who have experience of a God of pure love. This is a very wrathful God who needs adoration and continual, needs people to continually behave in a certain manner. We can't change our behavior patterns overnight.
And you don't believe he is that kind of God? Is that what you're saying?
No, I don't think he's that kind of God at all.
All right, reasonable point, reasonable point. Thank you for calling line 2. What about that,
Can
David?
I take that? I've
Yes?
thought very deeply about this.
Yes.
I'm a modern man. I'm disturbed that the majority of my friends in America are living in a way which, according to the teaching of the church, will bring about condemnation. Our Lady told Mary Lowley one day, and she lived with them for many days, I am very, very sad. I am sad because very few people will see God. Now, is this consistent with what Christ says? Christ says, blessed are the pure in heart, for they shall see God. To judge by the casual depravity of modern life, most people don't take that seriously. Jesus takes it seriously. Does this mean that God is wrathful and God condemns us? Jesus answered exactly that. He said, no, I do not condemn you. My doctrine condemns you. God is not wrathful. God shows us the way to life. It is for us to follow it or not to follow it.
All right, line 1 then. We really are taking in calls. Yes, line 1. Good evening to you. Line 1 is gone. Sorry, Peter. Is there line 2 hanging on there? It isn't. Does anybody in the audience want to get involved with this? Oh, very good. Yes, a lady up at the back there who did the singing for Castlebar. Yes.
Yeah, the only thing about the wrathful God is that I think that God can seem wrathful at times because just the thing that came to mind was Jesus in the temple. Jesus was a very gentle man going about the place and associated with everybody, but in the temple, he wasn't gentle. You know, he really blew his cool because of all the wrongdoing, you know, so
So you can believe in a wrathful God?
Well, what can seem to us as wrathful God, but can be for good, you know.
Be a chastising one. Yes, sorry. Gentleman there in the greenish jacket, I think, or is it grey? I'm not sure. Yeah.
I'd like to take up the point about Russia and
Yes.
conversion. Now, this point, of course, was made at Fatima. Our Lady said at Fatima that Russia would be converted. In the end, Maya marked that heart will triumph and Russia will be converted. But this, of course, depended on whether or not mankind heeded the message of Fatima. Our Lady said at Fatima that World War I will soon end, but a greater war will commence. And she said that war was a punishment for sin. But she said if people did not heed the message, even after the war, that Russian communist error will spread throughout the world. provoking wars and the persecution of the church.
So this is a confirmation of that message?
That's a confirmation
Yes,
of
all
that.
right. Let me try line 2 if I may ask you. Hello, line 2.
Hello, Gay.
Yes, yes.
The two men remind me, in a way, of a group that grew on the Late Late Show not too long ago, to childbirth in your own home lobby, because they just want to return us all to the Dark Ages, and that's that. I mean, this type of thing belongs to a very old tradition of apocalyptic prophecy, especially prevalent in the Middle Ages. I mean, there have always been prophets forecasting the end of the world, and now that we're coming up to the year 2000, I mean, it's obviously starting all over again. I mean, the fact that they refuse to recognize the need for contraception and divorce just shows that they really do want us all in the Dark Ages.
And,
but there's just one other point I want to make. I mean, the messages seem to lay great emphasis on sacrifice and sacraments, and, in other words, faith. But Christ's teaching had got to do with faith and good works. Where's the talk about good works in all the messages?
Okay, thank you. Yes, all right, you're gone. I presume she has no time for any of your message at all. Do you want to take that, David, or Jim? Do you want to take it?
Pardon? Do you want to do that?
Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Garabandal has 2 parts, what Our Lady actually says and what she does. The remarkable thing about the village was that it lived a type of charity which is virtually dying everywhere else. If someone was sick, 10 to 15 women would go, do her housework and do her field work. This was happening during the apparitions. The girls were continuously sent by Our Lady, when in ecstasy, to visit the aged and depressed. They were even told by Our Lady to tease one old lady who was very depressed, to visit the sick, to console people who were, for example, people who were disturbed that children had been killed in car accidents, were they in heaven, and the girls would go to them. They wouldn't have even said that out loud. The thought would be unformulated, the mothers would be full of fear, and the children would go and say, Our Lady has told us to tell you that your child is in heaven. In other words, the message is largely a warning message, but it's accompanied by a tremendous affirmation and ratification of that sort of goodness, of charity.
And apocalyptic prophecy
Yes,
coming
Our
round
Lady
again
said
for the...
specifically that this would not be the end of the world. And in fact, she didn't say that this pope would be the last pope. She said it would be the last pope of this era. And that's all.
Well, what's of this era? What does
This
that mean?
era of
Before these events.
Christianity.
That is
If the warning does occur, this warning will be worldwide. Everyone will feel it. It will be very intense. It will take the nature of, at least partly, of a feeling of what your sin really does mean. Now that would result surely in wide conversion, reconversion,
Yes.
that alone.
Yes.
And the miracle following within the year would confirm
Yes.
that, but not the end of the world.
Gentleman up beside the lady who sang for us her greeting, yes.
I'd like to mention the fact, which is not generally known, that many high churchmen have visited the Visionaries, and in particular Conchita, even while she's living in New York. And they have all come away from Conchita convinced of the authenticity of the apparitions. And what helps them to believe this is not the fact that she expects them to believe it. She doesn't care if they believe it or not. All she is interested is in living the message.
Yes.
But her humility is one of the main things and one of the main reasons why those many people, those many high churchmen have believed implicitly in it. And as well as that, Pope Paul VI has said to Conchita, I bless you, and the whole world and the whole church blesses you.
But officially the church doesn't back it yet, doesn't
Not yet.
authenticate it. Yes, gentlemen, right over the back there, you've been wanting to get in. Can you make it short?
Yes, I can
Yeah.
make it short. In respect to the conversion of Russia,
Yeah.
Our Lady also, our Lord, in elocution with Conchita, when Conchita asked him, is the miracle coming to convert Russia? No, he says, for the whole world, which I assume would include America.
Yes. All right. There's a question here from somebody. It's from Outfield. Many callers wanted to know if you are both members of Opus Dei.
No, not at all.
Not
in
at
fact,
all.
I was under pressure to join Opus Dei just
Why-
before.
why
and
do
one of
you
the reasons
recoil
is-
thus
oh,
from
yeah,
the suggestion, yes?
because I think that one of the valuable things about this, and Mr. Keane over there has indicated it,
Yes.
at the very end of all the apparitions, in the very last apparition, Our Lady said to Conchita, I have not come for you alone. I have come for all my children that I may draw them to my hearts. To me, that's what Catholicism is. It's a Catholicism of ordinary people. I'm not quite sure that that's what Opus Dei is, and I was under pressure to have something to do with it, and I was fending it off. No, not Opus Dei.
Strange question, but I asked Mina Cribben about this last week. What do you think of Protestants and other faiths, and where do they stand in the whole scheme of Garabandal and so on?
You mean Protestants or Protestantism?
Protestantism, I suppose. Protestantism, members of
Well,
the various...
it's simply in error, at least partially.
Simply in error.
Yes. Protestantism.
Yes. And
I'm
I mean, there are
totally.
certain points. I mean, in the Eucharist, for example.
And what will be their standing in this whole scheme of Garabandal and all the things that are going on?
They stand in exactly the same way as Catholics, indeed non-Christians as well.
So I don't think that it's in any way anti-Protestant. It's, I suppose, and this is true of all the apparitions, they're not ecumenical events apparitions. They're difficult for non-Catholics to cope with, but they are, in fact, a validation of the fullness of Christianity being found in Catholicism. But they're by no means a condemnation of those who are tremendously loyal to the gospel as they find it within Protestant traditions.
All right, there we have to leave it. Thank you both very much indeed. Very